Hey everyone, this is Taehyung. I don't know why I decided to record this tonight. Maybe because the house is quiet and silence feels heavier than usual. Maybe because tomorrow everything changes. My wedding is in less than 24 hours, and suddenly all the voices I've tried to ignore for months are coming back, especially my mother's. Don't marry her, she said one night. Her tone wasn't angry. It was calm, almost sad. The kind of sadness you only hear from someone who's already imagined how things will end. I remember laughing it off, telling her she was being dramatic. But the truth is, I remember how her eyes didn't move when she said it. They just stayed on me quiet, knowing, and scared. That memory haunts me now. I told myself back then that love would fix everything, that as long as I believed in her, in us, we'd be fine. But here I am, sitting in a room filled with wedding invitations, rehearsing vows that don't sound like me anymore. And I can't stop thinking, what if my mother was right? I used to think parents were just afraid of losing control, afraid to let us grow up. But maybe what they're really afraid of is watching us walk into pain they've already lived through. My mother wasn't against my fiance. She just saw something I didn't want to see. She told me, love her if you must, but don't lose yourself doing it. And I thought I understood. But now, when I look at my reflection, the suit hanging behind me, the ring on the table, I can't help but feel like I've already given too much of myself away. My fiance, she's kind, beautiful, in a quiet way. She stood by me when things got dark, when fame became too much, when loneliness felt louder than the cheers. She was there, always patient, always smiling, but lately her silence feels different. It's not the kind of silence that comforts. It's the kind that asks questions without words. Sometimes she looks at me as if she's trying to find the version of me she first fell in love with, and I realize I've been pretending to be that version for too long. I wonder if love can survive pretending. I wonder if my mom already knew the answer. When I was younger, I told her I wanted a love that felt like music, soft, emotional, alive. She smiled and said, music needs silence too, Taehyung. Otherwise, it's just noise. Back then, I didn't understand what she meant. But now, as I sit here in this heavy silence, I think I finally do. Love isn't about always being sure. It's about being honest, brutally, painfully honest. And tonight, I have to admit, I'm not sure. There's a picture of my mom and me on the desk beside me. It was taken years ago, before everything got complicated. We were at a small restaurant, eating kimchi jjigae she'd made herself. I can still remember her laugh, the way she'd tilt her head back, eyes closing for a second before saying, don't rush happiness, son. It'll find you when you're ready to stay. Maybe I should have listened. My fiance fell asleep hours ago. I can hear her breathing through the thin walls, steady and calm. She doesn't know I've been awake all night, staring at the ceiling, asking myself questions I don't want to answer. Am I marrying her because I love her? Or because I'm afraid of being alone? I used to think those two things were the same, but now I'm not so sure. If my mom were here, she'd probably just hold my hand not to stop me but to remind me to breathe. She never wanted to control my choices. She just wanted me to see, and That's what this night is about. Seeing clearly, even if it hurts. People say love is supposed to be beautiful, but no one talks about the fear that comes with it. The fear of making a mistake that lasts forever. And tomorrow, I'll walk down an aisle pretending that fear doesn't exist. But tonight, I can't pretend. I can still hear her voice. Soft, certain, don't marry her. I close my eyes, whisper back into the dark. I didn't listen, Mom, but I hope I learned why you said it. Outside, the rain starts to fall the same way it did that night she warned me. Maybe that's her way of saying she's still here. I still remember that day as if someone pressed it into my memory like a fingerprint I can't wash away. It was early autumn, the kind of day when soul feels soft, golden, and alive. I'd been waiting for it for weeks, planning every detail, hoping my mom would finally see what I saw in her. My fiancée wore a pale cream dress, simple but elegant. She looked nervous, the kind of nervous that comes from wanting to be liked, to belong. I told her not to worry, that my mom would love her. But deep down, I was worried too, because my mom was never easy to read. When we arrived, she was already sitting at the table. No makeup, hair pulled back, her favorite gray cardigan draped over her shoulders. There was something sacred about that image, the kind of calm only people who've lived through storms carry with them. Mom, I said, trying to sound casual. This is her. My mom smiled warm, polite, but quiet. The kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My fiancé bowed, her hand shaking slightly. Mom gestured for her to sit, and for a few minutes, everything was fine. Until it wasn't, she asked questions, the usual ones at first. Where's your family from? What do your parents do? But then her tone shifted. What do you love about my son? It was such a simple question, but heavy in the way only mothers can make it. My fiancée paused. I could tell she didn't expect that. She smiled politely, her eyes flicking toward me, then back to my mom. I love that he's kind, she said, and humble. I love how he makes people feel safe. Mom nodded, but she didn't speak. Her eyes stayed locked on her, studying every word, every movement. It was uncomfortable, the kind of silence that makes you want to shrink into the background. I tried to break the tension, laughing softly. Mom, don't scare her. She didn't laugh. She just said, I'm not trying to. I just want to know if she loves you or what you give her. I froze. My fiancée blinked, her lips parting slightly. Excuse me? Mom leaned back, her expression calm but piercing. You're marrying someone who doesn't belong to himself half the time, she said. He gives pieces of himself to everyone. Fans, friends, music. When it's just the two of you, can you live with what's left? Her words hung in the air like smoke. I remember feeling angry, embarrassed even. Mom, please, I muttered, that's not fair. She turned to me, her voice soft but firm. I'm not saying she's wrong for you. I'm asking if you know who you are with her. The rest of the meal was quiet. My fiancée smiled through it, polite, collected, graceful the way she always is. But my mom didn't ask anything else. She just watched, listening between words as if the truth was hiding in the silence. When we left, I tried to joke about it. She's just protective, I said, holding her hand. She nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes either. I understand, she whispered. Mothers always see things we can't. That night, I called my mom. I told her she was too harsh, that she scared her. She didn't apologize. Instead, she said, "You wanted me to see what you see, but all I saw was someone trying very hard to convince herself she loves you." Her words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I told her she was wrong, that she didn't know her the way I did. And she said something that I didn't understand until much later. "I don't need to know her, son. I just need to see how you change when she's around." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake thinking about what she meant. And I realized around my fiance, I was careful, measured, controlled. Around my mom, I was messy, honest, alive. Love is supposed to bring you closer to yourself, but sometimes it teaches you how far you've drifted. Still, I told myself that love grows with time, that my mom was just being overly cautious. I wanted to believe that. I needed to, but deep down, a quiet voice, one that sounded a lot like hers, whispered that maybe this love wasn't growing. Maybe it was shrinking me. A few weeks later, my mom stopped asking about the wedding. She didn't bring it up at all, and I mistook that silence for acceptance. Now I know it was worry disguised as peace. She still came to fittings, still helped me pick the color of my tie. But every time I caught her watching me, there was that same look, soft, sad, certain. The look of someone who already knows how the story ends. The days after that dinner felt different. Not in a dramatic way, there wasn't an argument or a moment when everything fell apart. It was subtler than that, like a song that slowly fades without you noticing until there's only silence. My fiance stopped talking about my mom after that night. Whenever I mentioned her, she'd change the subject, smiling in that polite way that hides discomfort. I told myself it was fine, that maybe it just needed time. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I tried to keep everything together, balancing schedules, work, interviews, rehearsals, wedding plans. The world still saw us as perfect, the idol who found his forever love. But behind the cameras, things weren't as simple. I started coming home later, pretending it was because of work, but really I was avoiding the quiet. She'd wait up for me, sometimes asleep on the couch, her phone still glowing with an unfinished message. When I kissed her forehead, she'd stir and smile, whispering, "You're home?" And I'd whisper back, "Yeah." But it didn't feel like home anymore. Love used to feel like music. Now it felt like maintenance, keeping things running, saying the right words, showing up on time, pretending not to see the distance growing inch by inch. My mom called less often. When she did, her questions were simple. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Never about the wedding anymore. I thought it meant she'd finally accepted my choice. But one night, she said something that stuck with me. When someone stops warning you, it doesn't always mean they've stopped caring. Sometimes it means they've accepted that you have to learn the hard way. That line kept echoing in my head. There's something strange about silence, how it can feel peaceful one day and suffocating the next. At home, we talked less. We smiled more for others than for each other. I caught myself scrolling through old photos once where I looked genuinely happy, where my smile wasn't practiced. I missed that version of me. One night, I came home to find her in the kitchen, sitting in the dark. Just the sound of the refrigerator humming and her phone screen lighting her face. She looked up and said, "Do you still want this wedding?" The question froze me. Of course I do, I said, too quickly. She nodded. Then tell me why. Not the public answer, the real one. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't know what to say. She sighed softly, looking down. I'm not your enemy, Taehyung, but sometimes I feel like you're here and not here. And she was right. Even when I was next to her, my mind was somewhere else, in a rehearsal room, on a plane, in a conversation with my mother I wished I'd handled differently. I was living everywhere except in the moment I was supposed to be building my future. The truth is, I didn't stop loving her, but I stopped feeling it, and that scared me more than anything. A week later, I went to visit my mom. I didn't tell her I was coming. When she opened the door, she looked surprised and tired. We sat in the kitchen, drinking tea in silence for a while. Then she said, "You look lost." I laughed a little. "I'm fine, Mom." She smiled gently. "You've been saying that since you were 10. I looked at her, really looked. Her hands had more wrinkles, her hair a little grayer, but her eyes, they were the same. The kind of eyes that saw through every performance I ever put on. Do you hate her?" I asked suddenly. She shook her head. "No, she's not a bad person." "Then why?" She interrupted softly. "Because love isn't about who's good or bad. It's about who you can grow with. And I don't think she sees who you really are, Taehyung, not the way you need to be seen." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because somewhere inside me, I already knew she was right. Before I left, she said one last thing. Marriage isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about choosing someone who doesn't ask you to prove yourself. That night, driving home, I couldn't stop replaying her words. And for the first time, I started to wonder, was I marrying to be loved or to prove that I could be loved? When I got home, my fiancé was asleep again, the wedding checklist still open on her laptop. I stood there watching her breathe, wondering how something that once felt so alive could now feel so fragile. In that quiet room, surrounded by reminders of a future I wasn't sure I wanted, I finally understood what my mom meant when she said, "Don't marry her." It wasn't a warning against her. It was a plea for me to stop running from myself. The wedding was only a month away when I started feeling like a guest at my own life. Every day was scheduled: fittings, meetings, interviews, decisions about flowers, music, lighting, menus. It all looked beautiful on paper, but none of it felt real. People around me smiled constantly. Staff congratulated me. Friends teased me. Everyone said things like, "You two look perfect together." And I smiled back because that's what I do best. I smile even when it hurts. But behind the smile, there was a quiet panic growing in my chest. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. No reason, no noise, just that unbearable stillness. Sometimes I'd walk out onto the balcony, look at the city lights, and wonder if anyone else could feel this kind of loneliness while being so loved. That's when I realized love doesn't always protect you from loneliness. Sometimes it makes you feel it more deeply. One morning, I caught my mom's text. Short, simple, "You don't have to do anything that doesn't feel right." No greeting, no explanation, just that. I stared at it for minutes. I wanted to reply, to say, "I'm fine," but the truth stuck in my throat. because she knew. She always knew. When I visited her that weekend, she didn't mention the wedding at all. She just made breakfast and hummed to herself while chopping vegetables. I sat at the table, watching her move, thinking how peaceful she looked in her small kitchen, as if time didn't touch her. Finally, I said, "You're not coming to the rehearsal, are you?" She stopped for a moment, then turned to me. "I'll be there if you need me," she said. "But you don't want to come." She sighed softly. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you're ready for." That sentence hit harder than I expected. It wasn't anger, it was love, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, just waits. After I left her house, I sat in my car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, eyes staring at nothing. I felt like a boy again, torn between wanting to be understood and wanting to prove I didn't need to be. Back home, my fiancée was on the phone with her friends, laughing about wedding details. Her voice was light, carefree. When she hung up, she looked at me and said, "You seem distracted lately." "I'm just tired," I said. She nodded. "You've been tired a lot." She walked over, rested her hands on my shoulders, and smiled softly. "You don't have to be perfect, you know. I love you even when you're quiet." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let that warmth sink in. But somewhere deep inside, I felt like we were talking from two different worlds, both speaking love, but meaning different things. The next day, during a photo shoot, the photographer asked us to look at each other like you're already married. Everyone laughed. But when I turned to face her, I realized something. I didn't know how to look at her without acting. She smiled effortlessly, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. And I smiled back. The cameras clicked, capturing what looked like a perfect moment. But the truth is, the only thing I felt was emptiness. That night, I found myself sitting in the studio long after everyone left. The lights were dim, the air thick with the scent of old wood and coffee. I sat at the piano, fingers resting on the keys, but no music came out. For years, music had been my truth. Every emotion, every memory, I turned them into songs. But now, nothing. It was like my heart had gone quiet. I pulled out my phone and opened my mom's message again. "You don't have to do anything that doesn't feel right." I wanted to ask her what if nothing feels right anymore. A few minutes later, she called. I didn't even say hello. She just said, "You're still awake." I laughed softly. "So are you." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "You know, Taehyung, silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's your soul trying to speak." I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. She continued, "Before you marry someone, make sure you can still hear yourself when you're with them." For a moment, I couldn't breathe because I realized I hadn't heard my own thoughts clearly in months. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time. I thought about the promises I'd made, the expectations, the future everyone was waiting for me to step into. And then I thought about my mother's face the first time she met her, the quiet sadness that looked like love wrapped in warning. Maybe this was never about the wedding. Maybe it was about the version of myself I was losing while trying to make everyone else happy. The next morning, I told my manager I needed a week off before the wedding. He asked if something was wrong. I just said, "I need to remember who I am, before I say forever. He didn't understand, but my mom would have. The week before the wedding felt like a dream or maybe a nightmare that looked too calm to recognize. Everything was ready. The suits were tailored, the invitations had gone out, the guests were flying in. The world was moving exactly as it should, but inside I was still, completely still. For the first time in a long while, I stayed away from the spotlight. I stopped answering calls, postponed interviews, and disappeared to a quiet place outside of Seoul, my grandmother's old house. I hadn't been there since I was a teenager. It was small, quiet, filled with the scent of old wood and time. The walls carried memories, my laughter, my childhood tears, my mother's voice calling me in for dinner. I sat on the porch for hours, watching the rain slide down the edge of the roof. For the first time, I didn't think about my wedding, my career, or my image. I just let myself be Taehyung. At night, I opened a notebook I hadn't touched in years, my songwriting journal. The first page still had my teenage handwriting, sing the truth, even when it hurts. I stared at that line for a long time. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten what truth felt like. The next morning, I drove to my mom's house without warning. She looked surprised when she opened the door, her eyes widening, then softening, as she saw me standing there with no makeup, no cameras, no staff, just me. Breakfast? She asked quietly, like she knew I didn't come to talk yet. We ate in silence, the kind of silence that's heavy but safe. Then I said, "Mom, what if you were right?" She didn't respond right away. She kept stirring her tea, then looked up at me and said, "It's not about being right, Taehyung. It's about you being honest with yourself." I thought love was supposed to make everything feel right, I whispered. "Love isn't always what feels good," she said. "Sometimes it's what feels honest. The problem is, people confuse the two." I nodded slowly, feeling something in my chest break open. She continued, "I never told you not to marry her because I disliked her. I just saw how you changed. The way you stopped laughing at small things. The way you started saying I'm okay too easily. I didn't realize until then that my mom had been watching me fade. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I didn't want to disappoint anyone." She smiled sadly. "You're my son. The only disappointment would be you forgetting yourself." We sat there, both quiet, letting those words settle between us. Later that evening, I went for a drive, no destination, just the open road. The radio played softly, and the sky turned orange, then purple, then dark. I kept thinking about all the choices that led me here, every yes I'd said out of guilt, every "I'm fine" I'd said out of fear. I pulled over by the river and stepped out of the car. The air was cold. The city lights shimmered in the distance. For a long time, I just stood there thinking, would it be selfish to walk away now? Or would it be even more selfish to stay, to build a life on a truth I didn't believe in anymore? My phone buzzed. It was my fiancée. She sent a picture of her dress, caption, "Can't wait to walk toward you." I stared at that message, feeling an ache in my chest. She didn't deserve pain. She didn't deserve confusion. She deserved someone who could meet her halfway, and I wasn't sure I could anymore. I didn't reply. I just turned off my phone and watched the water move under the bridge. It was calm, endless, honest. That night, I wrote a letter, one for her and one for my mom. In hers, I wrote about gratitude, memories, and honesty. You loved me with everything you had, but somewhere along the way, I realized I stopped hearing myself, and I can't walk into forever like that. In my mom's, I wrote only one line. You were right, but thank you for letting me learn it my way. The morning of the wedding came. The sky was gray, the air heavy with the smell of rain. I sat in the dressing room wearing the suit, staring at myself in the mirror. Cameras and coordinators were buzzing around. People smiled, congratulated, laughed, but all I could hear was my mom's voice. Before you marry someone, make sure you can still hear yourself when you're with them. And at that moment, I realized I couldn't hear myself at all. The door opened and my manager peeked in. They're ready for you, Taehyung. I looked at him, then at my reflection one last time. For the first time, I didn't smile. I stood up, took a deep breath, and said, "Tell them I need a minute." Then I walked out of the room and didn't come back. When I walked away from that wedding hall, the world outside felt painfully quiet. The rain had started to fall, soft and cold against my skin. I didn't run, I didn't hide. I just walked one step at a time until I couldn't hear the music anymore. People would later say I disappeared, but the truth is, I didn't vanish. I finally showed up for myself. I got into my car, took off the suit jacket, and loosened the tie that felt like it had been choking me for months. My phone kept buzzing calls from my manager, from friends, from her. I turned it off and let the silence swallow me whole. For a while, I just drove. No direction, no destination. The city blurred past me in streaks of light and rain. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like Taehyung the idol or Taehyung the fiancé. I was just Taehyung. When I finally stopped, it was at the same riverside where I'd stood the night before. The water was higher now, restless. I sat there in my car for a long time, breathing in the sound of the rain hitting the windshield. And then I cried. Not quietly, not politely, but the kind of cry that leaves you trembling, emptied out, years of pressure, expectation, guilt. It all came out in one night. When I woke up the next morning, I was still there. My phone was dead. The sky was pale gray, soft light spilling across the river. I felt raw but lighter. Later that day, I finally went home to my mother's house. She opened the door before I even knocked. She must have seen me walking up the street. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and pulled me into her arms. And in that simple moment, every word I couldn't say found its answer. We sat down at the table, both quiet. Finally, she asked, "Did you do what you had to do?" I nodded. My voice cracked when I said I couldn't go through with it. Her hand reached across the table, warm and steady. "Good," she said softly. "Then you listened, maybe not to me, but to yourself." That made me cry again. But this time it wasn't from pain, it was from relief. Days passed and the media storm began. Headlines everywhere. Taehyung walks out before wedding. Cold feet or hidden truth. Family drama behind the scenes. People speculated, judged, twisted everything. But I stayed silent. For once, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to the world. I wrote instead. Every night, I'd sit by the window and let my thoughts pour onto paper, the guilt, the confusion, the gratitude. I wrote songs that no one else heard. I didn't care if they ever did. A week later, my mom brought me a cup of tea and said, "You can't hide forever." "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm healing." She smiled. "Good. Then heal honestly." That night, I opened my laptop and wrote a letter to the public, not for sympathy, not for explanation, just truth. I made a promise to myself to live a life that feels true, not one that only looks perfect. Sometimes listening to your heart hurts more than pretending, but I'd rather face pain than live in silence. I didn't blame anyone. I didn't defend myself. I just told the truth. The world didn't understand at first. Some called me selfish, some called me brave, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that I could finally look in the mirror and see myself again, not the version everyone expected, but the person my mother raised me to be. Weeks turned into months. I started traveling again, not for work, but for peace. I went back to small places I loved, places where no one knew my name. I took photos, wrote, breathed. One evening, sitting on a beach in Jeju, I called my mom. She picked up after the first ring. "Are you okay now?" she asked. I smiled at the sound of her voice. "I think I am." She laughed softly. "See, I told you not to marry her, but I didn't tell you not to love again." I laughed too. "Maybe next time I'll bring her to you first." "Maybe next time," she said. After the call, I watched the sunset bleed across the ocean. I realized then that endings aren't always failures. Sometimes they're just beginnings that had to break to become real. My mother once told me, "Love should make you feel more like yourself, not less." I didn't understand that before, but now I do. If I ever love again, I want it to be with someone who can sit beside me in silence and still hear the music in my heart. That's the promise I made to myself that day, the day I walked away, not because I stopped caring, but because I finally started listening. And this time, I'll never ignore that voice again. Months passed. The world kept moving as it always does. People moved on to new headlines, new rumors, new distractions. But for me, time moved differently, slower, softer. After the storm, there was quiet, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that finally lets you breathe. For the first time in years, I woke up without alarms, without schedules, without someone telling me what to wear or where to go. I'd make coffee, sit by the window, and just exist. It was strange, almost unfamiliar, but it felt like healing. Sometimes I'd replay moments in my head, the rehearsals, the laughter, the vows I never said. There was no anger anymore, just acceptance. I realized that walking away hadn't been about giving up on love. It had been about giving myself a chance to find it honestly. One afternoon, while organizing old boxes, I found something that made me stop an envelope. Inside was a small photo of me and my ex-fiancé, taken on the day we first met. We looked so happy, so sure. On the back, she'd written, "Let's never lose this feeling." I traced those words with my thumb and smiled sadly. Because we didn't lose the feeling, we just outgrew the version of ourselves that created it. That night, I picked up my guitar for the first time in months. My fingers were stiff, awkward, but as I played, something came back slowly, gently. Not just the melody, but the emotion behind it. the kind that comes from pain but also from freedom. The next morning, I called my mom. Mom, I said softly, I wrote something. Music? She asked, already smiling through the phone. Yeah, I said, it's called Before I Could Listen. She was quiet for a while, then said, I'd love to hear it someday. And I promised her she would. A few weeks later, I shared that song with my fans. No promotions, no teasers, no interviews, just a quiet upload at midnight with a simple caption. Sometimes love means walking away so you can find your way back to yourself. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages flooded in, not of judgment, but understanding. People wrote about their own heartbreaks, their own silent battles, their own moments of walking away. Because sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the stories we were once afraid to end.